Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor, co-founder and co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces this weekly show. Visit FFRF.org to learn more about FFRF's vital work to keep religion out of government and public policy and to promote the views of non-believers. Ask for a sample of our newspaper, Freethought Today, or join. This week, we're continuing our two-part musical series on the little-known history of non-religious classical composers. Composers like Brahms, Verdi, Ravel, Prokofiev, Vaughan Williams, and many others were decidedly not religious. Let's listen in along with my co-host, Dan Barker, as classical pianist Jarred Dunn performs Brahms' Intermezzo on the Diane Yule Steinway piano here in Freethought Hall, Madison, Wisconsin.
And that was Brahms's Intermezzo. I'm here with classical pianist Jarred Dunn, playing Brahms. And how many people, when they sing their babies to sleep with Brahms's lullaby, know that they're singing a melody that was written by a non-believer? The German composer Johannes Brahms did not believe in God. Is that true? Is that what the historians all say?
That's what his first biographer said. Max Kalbeck wrote that nothing annoyed Brahms more than people assuming that because he wrote a requiem or other sacred works, that meant he was an observant religious person.
So he wrote a requiem not long after his mother died.
The German requiem.
The German requiem, right? Mm-hmm. And I heard that there was criticism that the requiem didn't say anything about life after death. It was just
yes.
It was biblical text, but blessed are they that mourn. Mm-hmm. You know, he was caring about human life rather than some afterlife.
Yes, certainly.
So Brahms...
he didn't include the most important tenets of the faith in this requiem. He excluded certain verses. And when approached about it, he said, I'm an artist. I used whatever I needed.
So, and in fact, I read that during the premiere performance, which was on a Good Friday, by the way, Easter week, the conductor complained, well, you should have John 3:16 in here or something. And Brahms said, well, I think I've gone far enough, you know. So he was using the text like he would use other pagan text. He wrote, you know, for other works, he used a text, not necessarily because he believed it, because he thought it had good musical value.
From what I understand of Brahms and his use of the Bible, it's similar to Schumann, actually. They took a great pride in the restoration of the German language, since the Bible had been translated by Martin Luther. So this was more a cultural thing than it was a reflection on their personal religious beliefs or convictions. Of course, Brahms seems to have been a complete agnostic.
And it was rare that he would do anything religious anyway. He was
Yes.
one of the few composers who he just wrote what he wanted. He didn't have to write by commission to the church or to the nobility.
Right.
He just wrote whatever he felt like writing. And most of it was inspired by nature
Yeah,
and
for
by
sure.
the mountains. Brahms even wrote, "We can't believe in immortality on the other side. The only true immortality lies in one's children." He also said, he was complaining about the anti-Semitism in Vienna at the time. He said, "If there was an anti-clerical party, that would make sense." Jan Swafford, one of his biographers, said, "Brahms was a humanist and an agnostic. Music was his religion." And then there's that story, I'm sure you know the story, he befriended Dvorak when Dvorak
He helped
was...
him, right?
He helped him financially, yeah.
Right.
Dvorak was a struggling young composer from Czechoslovakia. And one day, Brahms and Dvorak were talking about philosophy and life and about religion and all that. And Dvorak was astonished to discover that Brahms didn't believe in God. And so Dvorak later remarked to this violinist, Josef Suk was his name. He said, "Brahms is such a man, he's such a fine soul, but he believes in nothing. He believes in nothing." And Dvorak was a devout Catholic believer who thought that music was inspired from above. And here's just a normal human being, earthly German, writing music from hiking in the Alps and from all
Right,
of that.
exactly. One of his most famous compositions for chamber music, the second violin sonata, he wrote in one of his summer getaways, which was in the mountains. And he said, it escapes me the exact name of the place, Thun, Thun, I think.
Thun.
Yeah, that you can't walk anywhere in these mountains without discovering a tune.
Without discovering it?
Yeah, without
And
discovering a tune. Like
tune.
melodies,
Oh,
there are
I get
melodies
it.
in the mountains.
He's
yeah.
making a joke, huh?
That may be stretching it. But
Maybe a joke in English for a German.
yeah.
Well, and I did read that he used to send postcards to Clara Schumann when he was hiking, and in one case he wrote out the musical staff and he drew the shape of the mountains or whatever he was hearing or seeing, and some of that made it into his work. So
Wow.
he was drawing from life around him.
He loved nature for sure.
Yeah, not from anything above and beyond.
No.
And he died with no religious funeral and
Yes.
died a happy man. And in fact, the former girlfriend of his that he wrote the vegan lead, the Brahms lullaby for, her husband came and he was the last person to give him a glass of wine, and he said that was very good. He lived just a good natural human life, and look how he enriched the world without
Yes, music.
religion.
Exactly.
Yeah. So another composer from Europe that
You were
I don't,
speaking of the Czech Republic.
yeah, that
So
I don't know,
Janáček came to mind.
I don't know much about Janáček or Janáček, however you say that. But you play some of, what do we know about Janáček?
Well, he spent most of his life in Brno. He was born in 1854. And around 1905, he wrote the sonata, or in 1905, I should say, he wrote the sonata that I'll quote from. But I actually didn't know until doing a little more reading about him that he was against religion and he didn't like churches. And he particularly didn't like them because of the graveyards. I think these disturbed him the most. A little like Berlioz. Berlioz wanted to be a doctor, but he couldn't stand the dissections. He fled the dissection room. And Janáček couldn't stand churches and graveyards.
Well, there's a quote from Janáček. "Today they are lifting the bells into the church tower. It would be nice if they weren't calling people to bamboozling," however that translates from the Czech, but
yeah.
from bamboozling. And he said, "Life which ends so quickly and there is no continuation." You have something of, can we hear a little bit of what he sounds like?
From the sonata, for sure. So he saw a protest happening at the University of Brno, and a man was bayoneted, a workman, not a member of the protesting group. And so he wrote a sonata in two parts. The first movement titled Presentiment, and it's a description of the angry horde growing in intensity, and then the workman is stabbed. And the second movement, which I'll quote the opening of, is called The Death. So it's watching him die. Of course, it's sad and there's a lot of suffering in it, but I have to say the musical depiction is really exquisite. goes on for another 5 minutes.
And he had just watched a senseless death.
Yes, that's right.
And you wrote that while he was watching that. Doesn't that show that all music, even religious music, is human yearning? It's a human feeling of emotion and expression, and that brings it out.
That's right.
Sad. Music doesn't have to be all happy polkas, does it? Have to,
No.
It can be, okay, so from Czechoslovakia over to England, the British produced some pretty decent composers, I would think.
Yes.
Elgar. How many people, when they are graduating, they're marching down to get their diploma, they're marching to pomp and circumstances. How many of them know that the person who wrote that was not a believer in a God? He also wrote, Elgar was religious when he started. He was a believer.
I didn't know that.
And he wrote a piece called The Apostles. He wrote a piece called The Kingdom, and it was supposed to be a trilogy, and he never finished it because his views changed. He was reading the Bible, and his views changed, and he never finished that trilogy. And he decided that no, life is not top down, it's bottom up. He wrote, he was inspired by nature. He said, "This is what I hear all day. The trees are singing my music, or have I sung theirs? It is too beautiful." And when he died, his family didn't want to accept that he was a non-believer. They still thought he wanted to have a priest and all that when he died.
Right.
And he told the doctor, "I believe there is nothing but complete oblivion." And the doctor then later confirmed, Elgar had no faith whatever in an afterlife. So beautiful music. Some of it was inspired by religion, but then of course he, like me, in the middle of life, he changed his views.
Right.
And then another British composer who actually was from German descent, his parents were German, was Friedrich Delius, which I'd heard a little about. He wrote a thing called the Florida Suite. He disobeyed his dad. His dad wanted him to go into business, and he wanted to write. It's a classic story.
He moved to the States and studied for a time, I think, and began writing there. Yeah.
Well, his dad tried to set him up with an orange business in Florida, and he totally ruined the business. He just spent the whole time listening to music and writing and produced some great stuff. Delius wrote, "I have no use for religion. There's only one real happiness in life, and that is the happiness of creating. Christianity has produced an overall sub-mediocrity and really only taught people the meaning of fear." One of his biographers said, "Delius was a lifelong atheist, always ready to poke fun at the religious beliefs of his friends." And that's true. There was a young composer named Eric Fenby, who lived with Delius when Delius was an older man. He was losing his vision. And Fenby was a believer. He wrote a memoir, and he describes the arguments the two of them got into over religion. And Delius was ruthless. And Eric Fenby said he had no faith in God. So there's another example of a composer who was totally non-religious.
Yeah.
Then to France. Back to France, Debussy. You know a lot about Debussy and his views.
He didn't make a profession of faith, and he was definitely not a saint. He lived a very worldly existence. He was a dandy. He liked fancy things, and he had many different relationships. And
he was a ladies' man, you mean?
We'll put it that way.
Okay.
If people want to understand more about him, there are some really interesting web pages they can find. If you research the women in Debussy's life, you'll get a lot of interesting stuff. But basically, he made nature his inspiration and his religion. There's a lot of music by Debussy that's pictorial. Of course, the Impressionists in music, Debussy and Ravel namely, wanted to suggest images through their music. So where better place than in nature?
So were they kind of copying the artistic Impressionists, trying to use music in a sense, in the same way?
Yeah, in the sense of brushstrokes and shading and layering of the different sounds. What comes to mind immediately when I think of Debussy and nature is the piece Reflections in the Water, which is walking by a pond and seeing himself reflecting in the pool. Toward the end of that, there was a series of 3 repeating sections, exactly the same thing. Reflections.
So that's an
This is a good
example of
example.
music that was, as programmed. I mean, is meant to stand for something.
Mhm.
When often music is just.
Yeah, it's programmed.
So he was painting with notes.
Yes. And the piece that I wanted to share today by Debussy, The Girl with the Flaxen Hair, the 8th Prelude, is the other cornerstone of Impressionism, looking at paintings and then musically setting them.
So before you play that, let me read a couple of quotes by Debussy. By the way, he died in Paris while Paris was being bombarded by that final German offensive in World War I.
That's right.
So his death was sort of quite dramatic as well. Debussy wrote, "I do not wish to make a profession of faith. I have made mysterious nature my religion. To feel the supreme and moving beauty of the spectacle to which nature invites her ephemeral guests, that is what I call prayer." And his music, as beautiful as it was found to be offensive by the church. The Archbishop of Paris once said, "Debussy's work is offensive to Christian consciousness." So
Really?
even
Christian conscience.
Christian consciences
Yeah.
or consciousness, however that translates from the French. So even the church realized that he was not writing religious music. He was writing
Right.
offensive worldly stuff that people shouldn't be listening to. You have something of his you want to play?
Yes, the 8th Prelude, The Girl with the Flaxen Hair.
Okay.
We'll be back with more music on Freethought Matters after this break.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
Can I now say I'm a concert pianist?
Certainly.
I was just faking it. I don't know if there's any real piano part for that. But everybody knows that's
Strauss.
Richard Strauss, and you've heard that in the 2001 Space Odyssey, the science fiction movie. And Richard Strauss was a non-believer. He was German. He wrote, that was called Thus Spake Zarathustra,
Right.
which was not a Christian biblical illusion, it's a pagan illusion. And his biographer Alex Ross wrote, Strauss did not believe in God, and he saw no spiritual dimension in his art. His funeral contained no Christian symbolism of any kind. So there is a songwriter, a composer who did not believe in God at all, who drew inspiration from the real world. Now, over to Hungary, Bela Bartók. He wrote many things, including Concerto for Orchestra, music for strings, percussion, and celesta. Bela Bartók wrote, "By the time I had completed my 22nd year, I was a new man, an atheist. How more directly can you say that?
No,
really?
not at all.
Yeah, nature was what they really admired and felt.
They were
inspired.
searching for things. I mean, Schumann loved also literature and poetry and theater, drama,
Yeah.
and so forth. So the nature theme or literature and art seem to be what free-thinking composers gravitate toward, that inspires them.
Now over to England, Ralph Vaughan Williams. Did you know Ralph Vaughan Williams was a grandnephew of Charles Darwin?
I do know that.
So Charles Darwin lived in Down, England, and Ralph, when he was a young boy, was actually in Darwin's home with his granduncle.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, can you imagine that? And Ralph Vaughan Williams was a lifelong atheist. His wife, Ursula, wrote, although a declared agnostic, he was able all through his life to set to music words in the accepted terms of Christian revelation as if they meant to him what they must have meant to George Herbert or to Bunyan. And Ralph Vaughan Williams wrote a number of the hymns that ended up in the English hymn book, not because he believed in the lyrics, but he said, there's no reason why an atheist could not write a good mass. If you're going to go to church, you may as well hear good music, he
Yes.
said. His wife later wrote, my husband was an atheist. He later drifted into a cheerful agnosticism, but he was never a professing Christian. He's probably best known for A Lark Ascending, which was played at Obama's inauguration, so his music has really quite enriched the world. Now also further east, there's the Russian writers, Prokofiev, very prolific. He wrote 8 operas, including War and Peace. Prokofiev wrote Romeo and Juliet, Cinderella, and of course Peter and the Wolf, that famous music that children like to hear with all these different animal characters. He wrote, the question of religion faded away and disappeared. When my father died, my response to his death was atheistic. One of his biographers wrote about Prokofiev, fuzzy promises of happiness in the world hereafter were alien to his uncompromisingly rational, disciplined, here and now attitude. Prokofiev never wrote a single explicitly religious setting.
Wow.
Let's move from Europe and Russia to the United States. More current composer is Aaron Copland. Aaron Copland was raised in a Jewish family, but he had no belief at all, no practices. He didn't know any of the Jewish anything. And his friend Leonard Bernstein once said, you're a fake Jew, aren't you? And Aaron Copland said, well, yeah, he didn't really, believe or feel it. He wrote for nature and for what he wanted. And his funeral was non-religious, so he was totally not, observant at all. He wrote, of course, the famous Appalachian Spring, which was not the original title. Do you know the original title?
It was for Martha Graham.
Yeah, it was called Music for Martha.
Martha Graham,
Yeah,
yeah.
Music for Martha Graham, for dance. And Martha Graham later tacked the word Appalachian Spring on it, and that's how. And since that time, people were saying, oh, I can hear the Appalachian Mountains in your music, when he didn't even think of it. He was just writing dance music for. Professor Howard Pollack wrote, by all accounts, he was what many might call a secular humanist. Professor Leon Botstein wrote, although raised Jewish, he emerged as an adult without an ongoing connection to religion. So, also in America, Gershwin. George Gershwin, of course, and his brother Ira wrote a whole bunch of popular songs, but George considered himself to be a serious composer. He considered his music to be just as serious as any classical music. And George and Ira were from a non-believing Jewish family as well, never wrote about religion at all. In fact, some of the things they wrote were pretty anti-religion. It ain't necessarily so.
Yeah.
The things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. So here we have a brief snapshot of a number of composers who have greatly enriched the world through music. music that we have come to love and admire. And how many people know that they were inspired not by religion, but just by the natural world?
Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Jarred. It's been fun having you.
You're welcome.
On this,
Thank you for having
session.
me.
Let me go out with some fakey George Gershwin here.
Thanks, Dan and Jarred, for all that beautiful music and the eye-opening look at non-religious classical composers. If you missed the first episode of this series, or any of our previous Freethought Matters episodes, head to FFRF's YouTube channel and search for the Freethought Matters playlist. Thank you for watching Freethought Matters, because Freethought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.